Ali Smith, Atman Smith, and Andres Gonzalez, founders of the Holistic Life Foundation. I'm Emma, one of the book club program specialists coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. Let us know where you're from in the YouTube chat. If you have trouble commenting, make sure that you are subscribed to the Trauma Research Foundation YouTube channel. As you settle in, I'd like to tell you about the Trauma Research Foundation and outline a little of what you can expect from today's event. TRF is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to bringing together a community of clinicians, researchers, and educators to support finding and implementing approaches to help heal those whose lives are affected by trauma. Our book club is currently in its second year, and it's been a wonderful experience so far. Our growing team has been continually learning how to create the best experience for both panelists and our streaming audience. In this series, we have two moderators to facilitate this discussion, one of whom is with us right now, who is Dr. Keisha Sarabois. There's also a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that time, attention, and care. I'm excited to introduce the TRF team that makes this production possible. So we have Pat, our media manager, Connor, our media specialist. The two of them are tech heroes. Myself and my colleague and amazing partner in this program, Liz, each of us are program specialists. So today's session is the first episode of this three-part series. Each week brings together a group of community panelists to discuss Let Your Light Shine. Now, we invite our virtual community to participate in the discussion. Feel free to use the YouTube chat function to share your comments throughout the session. Our team at TRF are all tuning in with you, and we'll be sharing some comments after each discussion question. If you have trouble commenting, make sure that you are subscribed to the Trauma Research Foundation YouTube channel. Please note that this discussion is not a substitute for, nor does it replace professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have any concerns or questions about your health, you should always consult with a physician or other healthcare professional in the mental health field. We'll also be sharing information about each panelist as they respond to their first question. Panelists are invited to apply from anywhere in the world and from every background. We truly welcome voices representing a diversity of experiences and thoughts. To help ground us in this conversation, we're happy to offer a study guide as a companion to your reading. Please download the study guide from the link in the chat. And now to introduce one of our book club moderators, Dr. Keisha Sarabois. Dr. Keisha Sarabois is the CEO of Dr. Keisha Cares Consulting and Coaching and specializes in public speaking, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consulting, and trauma-informed mindset coaching. With a passion for racial literacy education and leadership development, she brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and global perspective to the table. Dr. Keisha's accomplishments have made her a prominent figure in the realm of public scholarship. Through TEDx talks, Instagram, YouTube, international conference lectures, published academic works, and programmatic initiatives, she has emerged as a catalyst for change, championing racial literacy and inclusive leadership. Boasting over 20 years of experience, her scholarly pursuits and advocacy work have garnered a discerning global perspective on educational research and diversity. All right, and now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Keisha, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Emma. I just want to start off by normalizing that I am in transition. I blurred my background so you can't see, but I'm just landing in a new city in the midst of several things. So I'm just going to normalize the fact that every now and then my camera may be off. But with that being said, today we will discuss parts 1 and 2 of Let Your Light Shine, How Mindfulness Can Empower Children and Rebuild Communities by Ali Smith, Atman Smith, and Andres Gonzalez. In part 1, Our Path, the authors engage Mohawk youth in yoga and mindfulness for leadership, mental health, and cultural education in reciprocal learning. The authors relate Mohawk and Baltimore challenges, police community integration, systematic inequalities, and community-driven progress. This section highlights the transformative power of yoga as more than just physical exercise. It becomes a path to healing, spiritual liberation, and potentially even social liberation. Now, because we're combining weeks 1 and 2, we're also going to talk about part 2. And here's a light refresher or context for that section. This little light of mine. The authors discuss their experiences running a nonprofit organization focused on helping traumatized children in underserved communities. They share the challenges they faced while working tirelessly to support their students and grow their organization. Despite the difficulties, and I stress the difficulties because they really talk about that in the book, they received some support and press coverage. The authors reflect on the complexities of nonprofit work in Baltimore, where larger organizations sometimes overshadow smaller Black-owned initiatives. They also reveal instances of well-intentioned people attempting to control their efforts or redirect funding. They discuss with brutal honesty the importance of homegrown solutions and the impact of local people working on local problems. As the organization gained recognition, more people wanted to get involved, especially from the white community. The authors offer guidelines for those who wish to help in underserved communities. They emphasize authenticity, avoiding a savior mentality, understanding privilege, practicing cultural competency, and most importantly, being consistent. The authors encourage individuals to work on themselves before trying to help others, as interacting with traumatized children can be triggering and challenging. And the book is beautiful in being honest about that within the author's experiences. The authors also stress the significance of personal practice and self-work, recommending that individuals address their own traumas and emotions before assisting others. They share their experiences of working with traumatized children and highlight the need for patience, kindness, and consistency. The chapter concludes with the authors acknowledging the unexpected depth of their commitment and the enduring impact of their work in helping children navigate their challenges. And so with that context, that generous introduction, I am now going to switch us into questions. And so let's see. I should have the first, there it is. Thank you. So the first question, and once I read the question, I welcome any and everyone who feels like they'd like to contribute to this to simply raise their hand and you'll be spotlighted and brought forward. How does the Mohawk tribe's emphasis on cultural preservation and resilience provide insight into addressing historical trauma and systematic challenges in marginalized communities? So with that question being out there, I welcome individuals to step forward in terms of how they'd like to respond to that. And let's also normalize taking a moment to speak. So let's see. Julia and Zita.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Once you're unmuted,
I raised my
feel
hand.
free to
I don't know
join
if you
in.
could see it.
I couldn't because I'm on my cell phone. So thank you for working with me. Like I need all of the partnership.
I thought we were just taking a pause, Dr. Keisha. I'm good to speak. What really stood out for me, as far as like what piece of that cultural preservation they were trying to preserve was the fact that like every citizen is valued at birth. One is self-actualized immediately. It's not something that they are striving to get to or have to prove themselves to reach. There's this deep connection to family, community, and just that sovereignty to be able to determine their own way of life and care for their own. And they take that on as a community responsibility. And because of that, they're showing up with compassion and understanding because they've already lived there. They know what it's like to be in that space. They know what the life circumstances are of the trauma of systemic injustice. So when a kid is making a mistake or acting out, much like we saw throughout this book, they don't penalize. They see it as a reflection of the elders, I believe is what they said in the community. And then they work together to write that and write that with compassion for the kids, for themselves, for the whole community, rather than to judge. And so it seems like what was taken back to the community in Baltimore is just the belief system that in marginalized communities full of intergenerational trauma and facing these systemic injustices every day, like it's just that belief of needing to care for one's own, right? Because when all of the external systems are literally built to work against them, there's a culture that's not showing up to care for communities, and they get to take that inspiration to create the community that does. So I felt like what was really brought out in the book was just like when all these social structures have fallen apart, caregivers might be too traumatized to be the safe enough adults. And I loved the quote that kids are living in a trauma-informed reality. So the big takeaway of community is learning to turn to one another again to offer these kids the love, care, and attention that they really need to thrive and feel valuable and safe.
Julia, I love that you said that. And even though life is lifing, I still made time for this moment because I appreciate the ability to dialogue. And because I had the privilege of spending time with you in previous book clubs, I want to bring in some additional perspectives, and I want to invite you to consider it, if that's okay. So based on what you just shared, given your personal background and the work that you're so passionate in doing, how could you draw a connection or a parallel in the wisdom you're noticing in the book, how you answer that question, and the way in which you're doing your work now? I know, right? That's a lot.
Showing up where you're at. And I love that it was so brought out in that book to like, there's trauma in your community. You don't need to go seeking trauma in any other community because people are facing trauma every day. And if we can look to support one another and be showing up with that compassion in every space we're in, the whole world gets a little bit better every time.
Thank you for that. I so appreciate that. Zita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Julia. I share a lot of your thoughts on this section. I was really moved from the perspective of considering how culture can play a revolutionary or even like radical reclamation role when it comes to individual and social identity, right? So the leaning back into history, into traditions, into honoring who we are as a reclamation of our autonomy and our ability to self-determine and act as independent agents, I think was really powerful for me. And you can see that occurring in multiple different social contexts as people find reconnection and rebuilding within shared communities, right? So I think that was really powerful. I loved and I love that you brought up, Julia, the concept of trauma-informed care, right? And the upbringing of trauma-informed community. And I think one of the things that I took away from the entire book, but really this section, is that trauma-informed mindset isn't about the credentials. Sometimes we really kind of get hyper focused on the systems and the structures that we've brought in, which are in all self-awareness, kind of colonial in their own right? Trauma-informed is often about community and about shared caregiving and shared carekeeping within the structures of connection. And so when we approach it more from that holistic, intergenerational social learning aspect, where we have older communities learning from younger communities, and everyone is a teacher and everyone is a student, taking that approach then into multiple different frameworks and models, whether it be a yoga-informed program in Baltimore or an autism nonprofit program here in Edmonton, whatever that winds up looking like, the culture of learning and openness and wisdom being shared in the community, I think was really beautiful.
I love that you highlighted the importance of creating a culture of openness, wisdom, and sharing. And one of the things I think the organization does so well is bringing that spirit of openness, the way in which they're so honest about how they realized, hey, we focused on boys at first because we were like, well, that's what we saw. And then girls started telling us, hey, we need these services too. Their ability to acknowledge where they weren't being open, where they weren't sharing, and expand that, I think is a great example of what you're highlighting. So thank you so much for sharing that.
I just want to really quickly add to that.
By all means, don't quickly do it. Don't quickly do it. Take your time and do it. We got 90 minutes. Yeah.
But their emphasis on education, right? So not just on learning, but on the lived responsibility that we have to share our learning and to not hold our understanding inside us, to really release it out into the world. So that reciprocal nature of learning, I thought, was just beautiful.
It was. Thank you for that. Dr. Benton, may I address you as Dr. Benton, or would you prefer Dr. Vance?
No, Dr. Benton is cool. It's fine.
All right, Dr. Benton, the floor is yours.
All right, again, thanks for having me. It's my honor to be here with the fellow panelists. Real quick, well, not real quick, but
thank you. Thank you. Take up space.
I can no problem. I can get fellow panelists noting trauma informed, right? Just the term trauma informed, because there's a lot of people who aren't familiar with that. And even when I tell them the company that I run, that I work for, and we specialize in trauma informed mindfulness and yoga practices, there's always a question to that. And I think a lot of it is because we are not cognizant of our own trauma and things that we need to resolve and deal with, let alone understanding it and recognizing it in someone else and then being able to address it. So I think that was a key point that was brought up. Also, the notion of, I think Julia noted, turning to one another, the Mohawk tribe and what they were doing. And that's crucial because the emphasis on the cultural preservation that's noted in the question, I think it builds self-pride, self-appreciation, self-worth, and just confidence in oneself and one's history. And what I mean by that is the resolve that's shown within that history and those who are here in the present. And when I saw the question originally in preparation for this evening, the first thing that came to my mind, and again, I have a little bit more inside information, working with the company and seeing what is going on there in our satellite location, but this is a blueprint for others to follow. It is a restricted type of environment in terms of, it's not a big city like Baltimore, Maryland, where there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving spaces and different spaces that people go in and out of. So it's not as an intimate touch, if you will. But being in that type of environment where you are appreciating your history, you are taught of those traditions, but also you are taught of strategies to help relieve yourself of some of the residue that came about from those historical experiences. I think lends itself to a more vitalized community. I think it lends itself to a more in tuned community, and I think it also lends itself to an actual quote unquote community, not just people coming in and out and going about their way every day, all day, and not really taking the time to understand oneself to be able to help others. Last thing I want to note in terms of what Zita stated earlier, and one of the principles that the founders were taught was that this information wasn't just for them. This information was to be shared with the masses. And I say that to say the quote that came to my mind was, "He who learns teaches." And it's our our responsibility to learn this. It was their responsibility to learn it. It was their responsibility to teach it. Because in the book, I forget the exact quote that Uncle Will gave them, but teaching someone just to be your student does not sustain what is being taught. But teaching that person to also teach this sustains this practice, that thought, so forth and so on. So I just wanted to share that.
No, I appreciate that, Dr. Denton. Like, you raised so many significant points, and I won't be selfish and address them all, but I would be remiss because I have the pleasure of, while I'm not currently there because of this conference, I do reside in Baltimore. And so when you touched on the point of one of the things the foundation or the nonprofit is so passionate about doing is equipping these children or equipping these students with skills to walk through environments that don't have the insights they have. One of the things I thought was so profound in the book is that they acknowledge, listen, their life is not going to change once they leave this classroom. They're going to leave all of this love, all of this wisdom, all of this support, and walk through those same hollow spaces. So how can we teach them to, and this is my language, but this is what it is, regulate their emotions, right? And be in tune with their nervous system. And so I thought that was just such a great point when you brought that out, in the sense of understanding the true weight of what it is these students endure. So thank you. I know I'm not the only one who has something to say, because we had a comment and we make a point to make this community space engaging. So our virtual audience, you are always welcome to contribute. But I do want to take a second and highlight what was shared from Denise. She shared to a statement that was made earlier. They were open to sharing their skills with boys and recognizing the needs that boys had for their services because they were once boys. The little girl had to open their eyes. So thank you, Denise, for sharing that. And we have another comment. Dr. Ben, you laughing now. You know you got that behind the scenes knowledge. So you sitting here acting like a panelist, but you got all the backstage memories. And so what brought a smile to your face? Tell us about it.
No, I was just smiling about the little girl had to open their eyes. There is, personally speaking, right, and understanding oneself and being able to stay connected not only to the universe but understand how the universe works within you. So I laughed at that because in my personal history, as a young man from Cleveland, Ohio, and transitioning to Baltimore, Maryland years and years later, every point in my life where there needed to be a transition, there needed to be something done to better myself, better my life, a female, a woman brought it to me. Right? So when it was time to move and when it was time as a college graduate, going back to the ghetto streets of Cleveland, Ohio, and fearing going back to those streets because of what I was working to get away from, was still there, even though I'm a college graduate and coming back home.
Right. Right. That same parallel.
Is there. And in a conversation with a young lady who her sister and I graduated the same class. She graduated years before us. I knew her, but we never had a conversation. And I was contemplating this for everybody just to get a glimpse of when I kicked off my life. I was contemplating staying in Cleveland, working and trying to get some money to move to Columbus, Ohio, so that I could continue my training and my NFL pursuits after having torn my ACL. And my thought process was to work a job and save money and then move. And this young lady said something to me that I repeat to myself to this day. This happened in 1995, so that was that long ago. And I'm telling her about my plan, working and saving money. And that young lady told me, Dance, I wouldn't even let money stop me. I would just go. And before that, I never considered going somewhere without any money. But she said, something's going to always come up to where you will never have enough money, quote unquote, to go. She said, I would just leave now. And because
oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Because of that message from the little girl.
Finish your thought.
The message from the little girl who opened my eyes. I moved to Columbus, Ohio a week later.
Wow.
With my car, my dream, a duffel bag, maybe $100. And here I am. So that's why I laugh, because sometimes us boys need little girls to open our eyes up.
No, I appreciate that. And that's one thing I love about the Trauma Research Foundation. They have really made me sensitive to the fact that the body and the mind share experiences. So when I heard you laugh, I heard your body engaging in the conversation. And Zita, I saw your head nodding. Like, that's why I said your name, because something you heard resonated with you. So your head is already up, but I couldn't think of a better segue to bring you into, or bring you back, because you never left, bring you back into the conversation. You're muted, sis.
Sorry, I had to shift to my phone.
There you go.
Sorry. I'm trying to figure out how Zoom works on my phone now.
I'm on my phone, so I completely understand.
I had to smile too, because I'll tell you, I learned so much of my knowledge from the tiny humans in my life, both gendered and non-binary, and they just amazing way of picking up on the details that we're missing. One of the things that I really loved about that section of the book is it recalled to me different ways of knowing, right? We know what we know, and we often know what we don't know, but we don't always know what we don't know. And what I mean by that is we're not always aware of what we are unaware of. We can understand, I don't understand this thing, but sometimes we need a perspective outside of us to say, there are things that you haven't considered that you're not even aware you need to be thinking about. And I think that that's really powerful when we think about perspective. And so it tied in a lot to me, and we'll get into it in a little bit, I think, on the idea of white-bodied support and white-bodied allyship, and how there are considerations that you probably just don't know because you're not inside the community. You don't have that lived experience of understanding what the community needs. Similarly, we have 3 incredible men who are bringing all of their souls to the table to heal their community, who were unaware that there were aspects that needed to be addressed because they weren't part of their lived experience. And I think that really speaks to the themes of intersectionality in the book, right? And really being culturally humble and intellectually humble when we go about trying to serve others. So that's all I wanted to add.
I think that's a great way to end this question, and the reminder of the importance of being intellectually humble. So with that, we will go to question 2, and I will happily hand it off to my sister Achara. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here with you all, and we'll move on to question number 2. The discussion has been so rich so far, and I'm just excited just to sit and listen to it. So moving on.
If you don't mind, I'd love to introduce you to our audience.
Oh, sure. Yes.
So for everyone who's watching, and for those who are not already familiar, I'd like to introduce you to our other moderator, Atra Tarfa. We're so glad that she could join us this evening after a hectic period of childcare exchanges and school pickups and all of that, which I'm sure many of us can empathize with. So, but we're so pleased that she could be here and so grateful for her presence. So, without further ado, let me introduce her. So Atra Tarfa is a highly skilled and dedicated certified trauma recovery coach, supervisory level, recognized by the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches. As an instructor with her extensive knowledge, empathetic nature, and personal experience, Atra provides invaluable support to trauma survivors as they navigate their healing journeys. Drawing from her own experiences as a trauma survivor, she founded Compassionate Coaching for Complex Trauma to help individuals reclaim their lives and thrive beyond trauma. As a board member of PATH, a program that addresses addiction and underlying trauma using an internal family systems-informed approach, Atra demonstrates her commitment to holistic recovery. She actively contributes to the program's mission of providing comprehensive support to individuals, recognizing the interconnectedness of addiction and trauma. Currently serving an 8-year term as a locally elected district supervisor, Atra brings a self-led, trauma-responsive voice to local policy, ensuring the needs of families in her community are heard and represented. Through her role, she advocates for the needs of trauma survivors and actively works towards creating a supportive and inclusive environment for all. So thank you again for being here, Atra, and take it away.
All right. So we will move on to question number 2. So I guess we can go to the next slide. And once we get there, all right. In what ways does HLF's approach, combining sports, yoga, and community engagement, demonstrate the potential to create positive change in underprivileged communities? This is a great question. So I'll open it up to the floor. Julia, I see your hand.
I love this so much because, and I think this was such a theme throughout the whole book and this entire mission, is that these 3 gentlemen are finding every possible way to be clever and show up and meet kids exactly where they're at. And that's what's creating safety in their community. They're building those relationships by starting with what the kids were asking for, which I believe was someone to play basketball or coach their basketball team, right? That's what they wanted to do. And by stepping into that role and meeting those kids where they're at, they got to become those mentors, those like reliable and safe enough adults, because they didn't just show up with their yogi agenda, right at the front to these kids that they're meeting. They knew that building the trust with the kids was really the first step to being able to introduce these other meaningful ideas for them. And I think they even mentioned that playing sports and running around and getting them active kind of helped to get out some of that flight energy, right, that they were having. And they could do that. And then having the space or finding the space and wherever they were at to be able to make that happen, playing sports, getting some of that energy out, it actually seemed to help the kids create some internal space to slow down and be better able to accomplish that stillness and slowness of the yoga and meditation. But I think most importantly, a lot of these kids hadn't experienced this safety with adults, like adults that were able to just be fully focused on them and their well-being and their voice and choice. Like, what did they want to do? And I think when kids get to see this, it teaches them that that is possible, right? And then they in turn are able to kind of turn that around and be that caring and self-resource person for the next generation of kids. And we talked about this a little in the first question, like that's that self-sustainability within the community, because these mentors were training mentors, right? It's like it keeps on giving because they learn what they're capable of. And that's what post-traumatic growth is all about, right? I can do this. And now I'm going to help you do this, even if you're running out of the movie theater and biting me on the hand. It's going to happen. And so I just thought that clever is like the big overarching word for me on this. Like they're creating positive change by just doing whatever needs to be done in that moment to make that difference for those kids.
I love that when you were saying that, you and I were talking about that Maslow's hierarchy being flipped and what self-actualization looks like in the beginning. And when we think about sports and the competitiveness of that, or community engagement and so forth, I think of how children sort of light up and believe, oh, especially like, oh, I can kick a ball, or I can do this, and how that begins that self-actualization. So like helps foster that, like, I am valuable, I belong, and so forth. And that creates that positive, that creation then impacts that and becomes positive change for the rest of sort of that flipped upside down hierarchy that begins to play. And I love what they're doing there. Thank you so much, Julia. Zita, I see your hand.
Hi, thank you. So one of the things I love about book clubs and about reading is that you'll see what different people take from the same perspective in the same novel. For me, play is my wheelhouse, right? I live in the realm of play. I'm a fitness professional. I am a sports coach, and moving bodies is my passion, joy, and vocation. And so this particular section spoke to me on this deep mission-based level, because and I'm not sure if it was explicitly stated, but it was so heavily implied for our people at home. Play is the active state of safety, right? And so the body is designed for this reciprocal relationship between stress and rest. And when we think about stress, we often think about that fight flight response. And it's a really, really important component. And inside our bodies, they don't really distinguish very well between the good stress and the bad stress. That's not how bodies work. But our psycho-emotional perspective and how we engage with stress is really environmentally created. Okay, so your surroundings totally transform how stress lands inside your body. And when stress is undertaken in a way that's consent-focused, in a way that's self-directed, that feels creative and engaged and connected and in community, that's play. And play is the business of children, and it should be the business of adults, right? It is where we do our most provocative learning, is in this state of connected engagement, of alertness, but alertness that's growth focused. And so I love that the children organically started to recognize, I love this rest component, I love this mindfulness component. Meet me there with these same principles in my body and in what my body is designed to do, which is move and be active, and to meet that rest with engaged action, right? And so it was this beautiful organic meeting of the body and the mind in community, and an expansion of the worldview of what it means to be calm and what it means to be connected. So as both a yoga instructor and sports enthusiast, I loved seeing this hybrid organically emerge. And there's so much potential in cultivating play, and we as adults can learn so much from how kids navigate community structures, how kids create social rules and social constructs and concepts around their sports, around their games. So it brought the biggest smile to my face when I saw that. So I loved this section.
I knew you were going to come with some sports stuff, Zita, and applying that active play and that's a form of rest. I love that. It's so true, right? That is how that naturally emerges. That rest can be the concept of rest being active, and that it's in that Julia likes to say just right energy, right? When we're in that ventrovagal state. And I just love that you brought that to the forefront. Thank you so much for your contribution to this question. Dr. Benton, I see your hand.
Yes, real briefly on this. I just wanted to connect what I just heard from Julia and Zita, expressed very, very eloquently and on point in terms of creating positive change in underprivileged communities. What resonated for me in that conversation was creating internal space, as Julia noted, and having connected engagement, as Zita noted, on a mission-based level. as Zita noted as well. I think those three terms really encapsulates what the approach is about and how it can be transferred to other communities, especially when it's proven that underprivileged communities, underprivileged boys and girls can learn mindfulness strategies, will take to mindfulness strategies, and will implement those mindfulness strategies. The one quote that comes to mind was from Michael Vick. He said, "If I had known better, I would have done better." So if our children are able to understand and know and be introduced to another way of being, they'll be better.
Yeah, thank you so much for adding that and breaking it down insightfully that way, and how that applies to this particular question. When we know better, we do better. There's another colleague I know that says that often. And I just wanted to also add to what you're saying. You know, I have another colleague, and she did a TED Talk recently, and she had said in her TED Talk, she was like talking about, she's a clinical psychologist, and she was with people that were depressed or upset. And she said, it's not that you don't know how to be happy, it's that you don't know how to be sad. You don't know how to handle disappointment. You don't know how to handle the things that life throws at you because nobody took you and modeled that or showed you the way. And I love that with particularly this question and with what HLF is doing and combining sports and yoga. Yoga, you can't just like, stand up and do a tree pose. You know what I mean? Like it, or these different poses. There's a bit of a challenge to that, and there's a bit of like, oh, I didn't quite get this, and then with sports, right? You don't always win, and there's these challenges, and there's an environment that is created for these kids where it's like you're teaching them how to be disappointed in healthy ways. You're teaching them how to experience, not sort of these high highs, but how to work through maybe some low lows. And it's just a beautiful framework that I feel that the organization is doing. And they're not alone in their disappointment. They're not alone in maybe a loss. They're not alone in any of those things. And that community engagement part is there to teach them that, oh, you are not by yourself. And that creates such positive change in these underprivileged communities, knowing that they're not alone. When they do experience whatever somatic emotion comes up, and to have somebody break that down for them and so forth. Julia.
I love both what Dr. Benton and Zita brought up. Just makes me think about just right zone, that window of capacity, right? Because it's not just some guy showing up and telling these kids, here's some coping strategies, here's some things you can do. It's like introducing them to these practices where they can feel what those things feel like in their system, right? Being mobilized in safety, getting a little bit of that sympathetic energy in a good way in play, and then being immobilized in safety, being able to slow down. And I think that is like the greatest long-term gift. I loved when they talked about the mindful moment room when the door was locked one day, right? And a kid just like took everything he'd already learned and like sat outside the door and did those things. And it's hard to teach kids something just by telling them. It's so impactful when they're in a safe space to just feel what that feels like. And then they're able to keep coming back to that resource over and over again. And I love how interactive this whole process is. It's like kids have adults telling them things all day long. And what Holistic Life Foundation is doing is showing up and listening to these kids, and then inviting them to use their body and to like look inside versus telling them anything. It's really helping them build that like self-trust and self-love, and knowing what's happening in their nervous system and being able to stay in their little just right zone too.
Yeah, it's so empowering, building that space of trust for them to then sort of take that and go, I can do that, and then continue to pay. Like I remember reading about in the with the indigenous population that they were working with, the Mohawk community, they were saying like now they're teaching forward. They don't even necessarily need us so much. And so this is that's the evidence that this model works, right? That this can be done, and it can be done in an autonomous way where they have that autonomy to continue on. I just think it's beautiful. There's a YouTube comment also from Denise Carderemus. I hope I said that right. When people feel threatened and overwhelmed, they often act out. The authors gave their kids option to calm themselves and to learn different ways to respond to stress and fear rather than act out. That reminds me of a Janine Fisher quote where she says, the healing begins at the pause between the trigger and response. And that's in that pause is where we can sit, have that mindful moment, and then choose how we're going to respond to the stressful situation that we're in. We're talking about that slow, right? That titration, and then creating this environment where they can pendulate between, okay, I feel this in my body, and then now there's a resource provided for them, and then back and forth as they continue on in these safe spaces that HLF provides. Oh, wonderful.
Real quick, just to kind of like piggyback on that, what you just noted and pausing. One conversation I had with a fellow educator of mine, grew up together. He taught kindergarten. He now teaches third grade, and he was speaking on how our children are impulsive and do a lot of things out of impulse, right? And I was explaining to him what they need is a strategy that will allow them to pause and consider. So what you just said between that, and I never heard it in that way, the trigger and the
response.
I think you said response, right? Trigger and response, that middle part, pause and consider. If you haven't learned this, because you have it, if you haven't learned the strategies to pause and consider, you will skip past that. So I thought that was a great point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and oftentimes these kids feel like they don't have the option to consider, right? That the only option they have is to react and defend because there's a threat. And when we provide environments where they can go, okay, this is not a threat. Okay, can I pause and consider? Dr. Vanderkolk talks about that in the book, that neuroscience piece of, okay, is this a steak on the stove, or is this my house on fire? Like giving them that time that you're saying to pause and consider, providing an environment where they can do that, because oftentimes these kids in these underprivileged communities have never even had that concept presented before them. Yeah. All right, so I guess we can go on to question number 3. If Dr. Keisha, you're still here, I can pass that question over to you.
Well, thank you. So, question 3 reads, what role does spiritual practice like yoga play in transforming one's mindset and outlook in the face of adversity? How can such practices contribute to personal and social growth? And I feel like this is segue right where we left off with Achara and Dr. Benton around the space of between trigger and response is the opportunity to pause and consider. And yoga seems to be a dynamic way to build up that muscle memory, build up that resistance that gives you the ability in the tension of the moment, in the height of all of the emotions, to pause and consider. Dr. Benton, I see your hand is up. Welcome you back into the conversation.
So in addressing this question, what I immediately wrote down was the role what role does yoga play, spiritual practice? It provides a moral compass that's embedded in ourselves. And it prepares us for the answers before the questions are asked and before the challenges are faced. The last point is it gives you the opportunity to be the example you want the world to be. Because if you are embedded in this practice and you are bringing a sense of calm to yourself, there's absolutely no way you won't bring that calm and that energy to others. As the saying goes, the one who brings sunshine to others cannot keep it from himself.
You bring up a point that I'm curious to hear your further thoughts on, given your perspective as someone who has worked directly with the populations. Going back to what you shared about spiritual practices and yoga having the ability to embed a moral compass within yourselves, how have you seen that play out in real time with these students as they go through the practices? The whole aspect of first developing the moral compass and then watching that moral compass be the, oh, here we come full circle, be the difference between trigger and response to trigger, pause and reflect, then respond.
Well, to Julia's example about the student that engaged in the practice in the middle of the hall, not in the middle of the hallway, but outside the classroom, that's what I shared with the authors, because that was my aha moment as the principal of the school who brought this program here, just because why not? It is what people need. Let's do it. So that was my aha moment. So I think, to answer your question, is once they are engaged in these practices, and once they have the room and space to engage and learn more, and open themselves up, they take it on. It was one young lady in particular, when you say real time, she was a normal teenage young lady from Baltimore, Maryland, with anger and all that stuff, right? But I remember her telling me, Dr. Benton, I was really gonna go off, but I just took a stress breath. I took a couple stress breaths, and I just decided to walk away. So that was real time.
Yeah.
Two examples that's real time that I can see. And the last point, some of our former students that learned about mindfulness and those practices, because of our partnership with HLF, they became teachers with HLF after they graduated from our high school. So that's real time for you.
That is awesome. And for anyone who's just joining in, HLF, first off, please read the book. But HLF is the Holistic Life Foundation. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Benton. Zita, I see your hand, and then Julia, feel free to come in as soon as she finishes.
Thank you so much. Those were wonderful comments and so much to think about and reflect on. One of the things I like to chat with my students and colleagues and class participants when we're engaging, especially in yoga practice, is that yoga really is this wonderful opportunity to remind us of how small we are. And I know that that sounds like a very strange thing, but again, going back to this idea of humility and to this idea of understanding that in the scope of the world, our experiences are tiny slivers in the history of humankind, right? And that we actually share much more in common with each other. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate about the shared practice of yoga when we do it in a group is when I meet my class in community, I am joined by the commonality of our body experience. And what I mean by that is human bodies are obviously all very different and very unique, but there is a shared bodied experience of being human, even for those of us who are neurodivergent and disabled. Actually speak to each other. It's why we can often understand and empathize with language around emotions and feelings, even on things that we haven't lived, right? Because our bodies speak very similar language. On a deep level, we're talking mirror neurons and we're talking our nervous systems responding to each other. But I think it goes much deeper than that on a spiritual level when we meet each other in the unity of the species as part of the ecosystem of the world, right? And part of the elements of nature and air and the reciprocity of breath, and that the trees breathe for us and we breathe for them. And so I think that there's a really nice perspective in terms of allowing ourselves to engage in the spirituality of the human experience, right? Above and beyond religion, above and beyond practice, of just the shared kind of embodiment of I'm here in this moment, occupying space, and that space is so short, and when I'm gone will continue above and beyond me. And I just really believe that that opens up the space for responding in gentle and sensitive ways, to the bigness of our feelings, that the bigness of our feelings are really quite small in the collective atmosphere of life, right? So I don't know if that makes any sense, but
oh, that makes deep sense. Like the kind of sense where you almost need to let that comment breathe before anybody else says anything else. Like you said a lot of profound truths. I know one of the ones I loved the most was the reciprocity of breath and the importance of that. So in that beautiful thought, I invite us all, virtual online community as well, let's take a collective breath together, right? So let's just breathe in deeply. And in honor of the book, we're going to breathe in through our nose and exhale through our nose. I'm with you, Dr. Vincent. I'm with you. All right, ready? Thank you. Julia, the floor is yours.
I apologize if anyone hears my little people. They just got home from school. But
hey, we
I think it's so funny,
life.
right? We're all here.
Yeah,
doing
life
it
is life. We normalize it. Absolutely.
Zita, I think it's so funny that earlier you brought that, like, we're all reading the same thing and like pulling it from our own lens, and y'all just went so deep into the spiritual. And I looked at this question and I saw like mind and adversity, and my little like nerdy neuroscience part just went there, right? Straight there. So when I looked at this, I just really went back to that like neuroscience of the nervous system, and like the fact that when someone is experiencing adversity as their norm from like the day they show up, their brain is like so developed to just be constantly scanning for cues of danger. Like their limbic system is developed to just be overactive, right? Because the world feels, or in some cases is, just not so safe. And they feel like they need to be 3 steps ahead all the time. They haven't been shown an opportunity to really slow down with a spiritual practice, or to be in that present moment that they can look inside there and like reflect on their internal world at all. So when something like yoga is brought to them, even with maybe basketball first, right? And then the slowdown, they're offered this space that is so unique because they don't have to be on guard there at all. And it might be their first opportunity for their nervous system to experience like that quiet and peace. And without that, like there's no way for them to learn how to resource themselves internally, because they don't have the space to do it when they're always looking for danger all around them. And I think this came up in the book that these kids, like once they have the tools, they can't stay in that space forever, right? So they do have to go back into the world that they are living in. But once they're resourced, they're not entirely reactive. They've got the pause, right, that we're talking about there. And they have the shift in mindset that lets them like see the world a little more broadly and not just be looking for cues of danger there. And that's when they can really get to know themselves. And it's that type of support system that creates like what the inspired by the Mohawk, right? Just not just personal wellness, but community wellness.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And in terms of the Mohawk culture and what we also see with the students who then become teachers is this responsibility, this innate desire to teach these skills to others, right? I think that is the most profound thing for me, because while we use language about, underprivileged and underserved, et cetera, we are also now using language of teacher, advocate, empowered, experienced learner who is now teaching these skills to people who are walking out a path they know well. And that ability to honor their wisdom, even at the young age of seeing, because of all that you've walked through, who better to teach this than you, I think is so innately valuable. Okay,
absolutely.
so
like when the support system is built there, I love that they get to become the support system, right? It's like they know it so well.
Right. They get to experience the support, and then they get to teach and give that support. And that's what I love most. They get to give the same support that they benefited from. Ashe. The floor is open. Atra, I'm going to ask you to come forward. I have to transition out, and I need your support in this moment. So I'm just going to normalize. This is one of those life-lifing moments. And I'll hand you the floor. Thank you.
My apologies. I was having problems here. So I couldn't hear, so my apologies. We'll move on to question 4. I was having trouble with my audio on this end. How do Cassie and Smith's parenting choices and discussions about race contribute to Ali and Atman's development of a well-rounded perspective on their identity and their place in society? Zita, I cannot wait for your answer to this question.
Even just reading this question brings tears to my eyes. I am the incredibly fortunate, blessed parent of 2 incredibly remarkable children. And Atra and I, having paneled together before, may recall that one of my children is non-speaking, and so moves through this life in a complete state of embodiment because he's so limited in his ability to communicate. And my other tiny human is very verbal, inherited all of his words, and they move through the life in this very autistic intellectual perspective. So there's kind of these 2 things. And I connected so deeply with Cassie and Smith because as we discuss inclusion and diversity and equity in this world, and I am navigating this with my 2 tiny people, trying to instill in them a sense of self-acceptance and self-worth, and to celebrate the differences that they bring to the planet, it can feel almost insurmountable, like you're dropping tiny little drops of rain into an ocean sometimes from the parenting perspective. And so being able to see how that translated into these grown men who took these words of wisdom and this learning that their parents instilled in them and are now decimating it across the world is heartening for me as a parent to consider that maybe they're not so little drops. Maybe these drops together actually do change the waves and actually can control the current of the world. And so it just was really impactful in that sense And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for the parents reading this book and engaging with this book to remember just how formative our roles are, how the words we choose and the language we engage in and the work we do and where we bring our energy is literally how our children form their sense of identity and placement in this world, right? And so the resilience and the messaging that was internalized by our authors is, I believe, the real kind of big theme of the entire book, which is why I think they ended on Will's final day, right? Talking about how this culture of knowledge and acceptance transmit into the next generations, and that now they absorb that responsibility and they pass it down as well. And so I just am really moved on a deep personal level at the belief that the things that we do on our little tiny scope of household can move beyond us. It was very, very powerful to me.
Yeah, I completely and absolutely agree with you. I found myself as I'm listening to the book, because I listen to it on Audible and you get to hear their voices and them sharing from their perspective, which I love it when authors narrate their own books. It gives that added dimension. And I just remember as I'm listening to it going, oh my God, because I didn't have parents, I wasn't raised in that environment of that sort of exploration, and knowledge is important and listening to different perspectives. And then when they talked about their Uncle Will and the deep conversations they would get into and, having that, it's like, it was just a really robust, well-rounded, just sort of, this is a growth mindset way, right, of raising kids. And I just thought that was so beautiful and wonderfully demonstrated that this is possible. And it does have those small ripples, right, create those waves, and those tsunamis of change that can impact the entire world in a positive way. I totally agree, Zita. Thank you so much for that contribution. Dr. Benton, I know you got something to say about this, so please come to the floor.
Well, I had the honor of meeting their dad a couple of years before he passed away. And one thing he told them at that time, when I was still the principal and not even thinking about working with HLF, nor did they, but their dad told them as grown men that they better stay in touch with me, and they better keep me around, because I think he ultimately knew that we would need each other when it all boiled down to it, because we're together. And their mom, she used to come to my office representing Holistic Life Foundation and meeting with the principal and getting barked at like everybody else got barked at if I didn't think that things were going the way they needed to go and where I felt they could go with the program. So she would get an earful from me, but I call her mom, and the same messages that she sends them, the morning greets and the words of affirmations and all those good things, she sends them to me as her bonus son. So I do have a little intimate relationship with them both. And seeing this question, I would say that they have the best of both spectrums. Although I met Smitty when he was a bit way more reserved than he was as when they were growing up. One thing that I took from him in terms of what he gave them was he stressed the self, being true to oneself, being true to one's culture, being true to one's race, being true to one's knowledge base and understanding and movements and all of those things. And I think Cassie stressed the selfless and being able to give to others, and the responsibility of being friends, and the responsibility of, although you may value your race, that doesn't mean you have to devalue another one. or devalue others and raising up yourself. So I think they have both of those worlds that made them well-rounded individuals.
That is such an amazing balance of perspective that you just shared, and how wonderful it would be if really all of us were able to get that for ourselves and then impart that into our children, and the bonus kids that come across our lives as well. Yeah. Thank you so much. I found myself inspired, and it actually inspired me I got little golden nuggets here and there in my own way of parenting and my own parenting style. It definitely broadened my perspective and illuminated some things that I knew were there, but maybe I had some uncertainty with, and I was like, oh, wow. And granted, every kid turns out not the same. Not every kid turns out the same. I'm sure within the brothers, they're different and same at the same time, but it's that possibility, right? Of if you give that option, if you widen a child's perspective, that they have that, like we were talking about earlier, some kids don't even know that they have options. They don't know that other things exist outside of the world in which they live, because the area in which they live may be so threatened. And so having this creates, and I have options, creates, though there are more than one perspective out there in the world to consider. And I just thought that was beautiful how they did that. All right, so I guess we can hand that off to, unless anyone has any other contributions to this, we can go ahead. Oh, there's another comment from YouTube from Denise again. That reflects the 7-year-old that was helping the yoga practitioner. He was rough in the community and helpful with the new person, and was teaching him skills that he learned. Yeah, I remember that part. We'll go ahead and thank you so much, Denise, for your YouTube comments. Keep those coming, please. We invite you to be part of this conversation. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes, Dr. Keisha, we'll move on to you with the next question.
Thank you. How do the authors view the difference between their personal meditation practices and what is taught in schools? How do they handle the limitations imposed by the school system on discussing certain concepts? And I know there is some interesting talking points around this, because we had the privilege of hearing about some of this in our conversation before we went live. So this should be a really interesting discussion as we unpack this question. So let's see. Julia, by all means.
Yeah, that word clever coming up for me all over again with this one, right? You got to work with what you've got there. And it seems like the Holistic Life Foundation has been highly skilled in working with the parameters of what they have in any situation that they've been met with. And they've been able to accomplish so much in any moment, in whatever space they're working in, like just by being really flexible and adaptable, knowing that like the real importance is prioritizing youth in their community. So I know they said their personal practice is based on their knowledge of energy in the universe, but that's maybe not flying in the school systems that they're showing up in. That's a little bit too woo for them, maybe a little bit too religious. So they left it behind, right? We don't need to call it chakras or mantras or meditation. I think they said they call it periods of silent reflection, bending or stretching for relaxation instead of yoga, breathwork for de-escalation. And it's because I think they recognize, right, that inherent value of what they're doing isn't rooted on what they call it. We're going to call it a taco breath, right? Is it helpful? It's great. It's helping those kids. And I love that they turn to the kids to find the names and figure out how to shift that language to get them into the places where they were needed most. And it doesn't change the positive impact of the action to be flexible with what you're calling it, right?
Agreed. Now, up until this point, we've been very gentle in not directly quoting the book, but there's a lot of cussing in this book, particularly when it comes to moments like this. Like I would just, I'm that moderator. I'm gonna call a spade every time. And while I'm not gonna cuss because I don't know who's watching this, I will acknowledge that there was a high level of sugar, honey, iced tea. Catch me. When it comes to the fact that the Holistic Life Foundation, Dr. Benton, please stop laughing. You unmuted and you throwing me off. But there was a high level of hypocrisy in the fact that they did the work of adjusting the language. They did the work of making their styles more approachable because they were coming from such a deeply rooted, experiential, authentic teaching force that was so rigid in the sense of they took the time, Uncle Smitty and I think it was Uncle Will, like the elders, that the yogis in their neighborhood were scholars of this work. And so they taught it to them at the highest levels. And then to see these men do the work of making it acceptable at the school district level, and the reward for that was for them to just steal their stuff. Call it the same thing under a different name. And I was so proud of them for calling that out, because if that isn't the academic experience, I don't know what is. Right? We see that consistently in academic circles. I call it the Bagger Vance experience. Like you're just supposed to show up out of nowhere, help somebody else reclaim whatever privilege they lost, whatever notoriety they lost in these elite circles you were never welcomed into, and then accept little or no compensation, and you be the one to leave. You don't even have to give them the discomfort and, be cause them with the uncomfortability of you forcing them to remove you. Like you just decide to wander off into the background before the accolades and all the big rewards come. So I was so proud of them for putting that in the publication. Like, no, this is what consistently happened. And we'd spent years. Yeah. Well, let me finish that. We spent years walking that out. And so I was so proud of them for saying, like, no, let it be known. This is a part of our story too. What were you going to add, Julia?
Oh, I just found it really humorous in the book, like what you're saying. They jump through all these hoops, like so much bureaucracy just to try and do some good. Changed language on like 30-page documents, right? Like did everything and then show up at the school, and over the loudspeaker, it's like, please report to the gym for yoga. I just thought it was a funny juxtaposition of like concepts. Like we've done work for months trying to get this acceptable, and then we're going to show up here and they'll call it what it is anyways.
Yeah. Zita, jump on in the conversation. We welcome you.
Oh, I have opinions.
This is the space for that. Let's have a discussion.
Okay, so as an academic, first of all, I hear you. And I like, it's interesting. I occupy a couple of invisible spaces of intersections, right? I am a trans identifying human. I'm agender. I, again, being autistic, and entering into this space as an openly queer human. So I come at this from a couple of different perspectives, and man, do systems ever know how to colonize other people's work? Like, wow, are they ever effective at taking culture out of culture? And that's not to say, and I think that they mentioned it in the book too, right? Like, sure, like we're not saying that we want to bring radical religious practice into school. I respect and honor the importance of secularism as a means of accessibility and inclusion as well. But it's offensive to me on a deep visceral level that we have equated not imposing beliefs with not exposing people to beliefs. And I think that there's real problem in how we are expecting culture to dilute itself down and erase itself in the name of, let's call it what it is, white westernized systems that decided that their culture, including the secular approach to their culture, is the only way of engaging with knowledge. So I have opinions on that. You call it the Bagger Vance approach. I call it the gambler approach, because when I'm teaching social activism and social advocacy, I always tell people you need to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. And there, right, where you just say the system is too big and I'm not placing my energy here, and I am going to allow this to exist and by my space. But you can't forget that at the very beginning of that sentence is sometimes you got to hold your ground. And there are a lot of ways of holding people accountable. It can be in the moment, or it can be writing a book, calling it out, calling a spade, and saying, this actually impeded our ability to change the world in positive ways. You added emotional, mental, and physical labor to our already overburdened lives as we are sitting here trying to fix the problem that you have created. So I have opinions, and I thank you for letting me.
Zita, your opinions are always welcome. You have opinions and we have the space to hear it. Ashura, I see the discussion. Well, come on, revolutionary.
Yeah.
Come on. I know this is your area. Come on.
Well, I mean, I like Zita have a lot of opinions, right? But I'm going to try to narrow it to this. There's something that's very important, I think, that needs to be at least mentioned on page 175. And it's so funny you mentioned quoting the book, because I was actually about to do that. But it says, most of our schools are almost solely focused on academic achievement and getting as many kids past the graduation line as possible. This works when it works. Every school has students who are so clear in their motivation and so determined or talented that they are able to succeed. But this isn't all kids. It's not even most kids. And yoga is a practice and process for developing a deeper contemplative state. So when we talk about the process of yoga and what it takes, right? And then also that there's got to be sort of that actual motivation too, or at least an environment that creates that motivation of that space of safety and trust and self-actualization to grow. I think of that story over there on page 198, I believe, when they talk about Darren, and they arrive, and he had the other kid up by the collar, and traditional school, right, expel him, right? And it's so much to the point where Darren thought when Ali was getting in the car to drive him that he was going to drive him home and he was going to get kicked out of the program. But no, he pulled up to a store, and because Darren was upset that there was a hole in his pants and he was getting bullied, and that's why there was that altercation in the room. But HLF, their approach, let's go buy this kid a pair of pants. Let's not kick him out of the program. Let's connect with this kid. Let's have an engagement here. And if we're so focused on our numbers and the academic success, I know where I talk about this often, right? Lots of decisions are made by lobbyists here so that they can get money, so that they can go pay for the schools. We just had a new school built. Literally built. It's about a year old, and they already put portables. They spent $8 million to put portables. And so now we have kids outside that are in the heat in Florida. And it's like the way that sometimes the school system works, not sometimes, I'm being restrained. Oftentimes the way that it works, I'm just going to keep it real. I have Keisha as my co-host. She will hold space for me.
Yep, every time.
These decisions are not made for the betterment of the child, right? They are not made for the betterment of the children that are going there, and they're not thought through all the way. And so having this mindful approach, just even not just their personal meditation practices, but in how they handle everything, they're responsive. They grew up in a way where they were taught to practice in the pause. And it's like, Dr. Benton talked about impulsivity that the kids have, but yet school systems are an environment that creates that impulsivity as well. And it's so heartbreaking watching it as a parent happen. And then we have these programs, and oftentimes organizations are resistant and school systems are resistant to things like this coming in because, we don't know what you're doing. We don't try. And it's so, again, I have opinions, and it's really frustrating coming from a mom's perspective, but I just really wanted to name that when it comes to the school systems and what these guys are doing, it's so amazing what they're doing. And if they talk about it, if we could just listen, and if we could just connect and understand what the kid is, instead of putting the kid in handcuffs, imagine the deputy with next to the kid, learning about the kid and knowing the kid's life and talking to them and their families. And it's a different picture at that point. And I think what they're working towards is having that different picture moving forward from now on. So I know that was a bit of a rant, but I was holding that in.
No, we have opinions. As Zita said, we have opinions on this topic. Yes. So the floor is open. I'm not calling anyone out. We have a few minutes left. So I welcome anyone who has opinions that they want to share. Then if we don't have opinions, then let's have community. Oh no, Zita, okay, come on.
I really wanted to call attention and thank the entire section on this is how you white ally. It's not made explicit. It's important for it to be made explicit. I think the same ideas here extend to allyship in every underrepresented and underserved community. But thank you for clearly illustrating that there are times when you just need to sit down and listen and learn and watch. And I felt like it was a really important section that I hope everyone took deep note of.
Thank you, Zita. You will have the final words of this week's book club. And it's with great joy that I hand the discussion back to Emma. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keisha. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. This has just been an incredible discussion to be a witness to. So this does bring us to a close of our discussion today. Again, thank you to the panelists, new and returning, new being Dr. Vance Benton, returning being Julia and our very own Zita. Our moderators, Dr. Keisha Sirabwa and Atra Tarfa, and thank you to the TRF team who are all making this book club happen. And thank you, our virtual audience, for spending your time with us. We look forward to seeing you at the same time next week for our second installment of the Let Your Light Shine book club, where we'll be discussing part 3 of the book. We're delighted to offer you a new resource, the Digital Care Package, as another component to the book club experience. This can be accessed via the TRF website, via your member login, or by using the link that Liz will be sharing in the YouTube chat. So everyone who has registered for book club will receive an email with next week's YouTube link before the next session and a link to the digital care package as well. And again, you can also find that information when you log into your TRF members account if you are registered for book club. And finally, Dr. Keisha and Atra will be, well, I'm not actually sure if you guys will be doing a conversation after the conversation, but not this time. Okay, maybe
no, ma'am, not this time.
In any case, it's another treat that we will have a better time for everyone. So for those of you watching, we'd love to hear about your experience. We encourage you to reach out and share any feedback you have with us by emailing the Trauma Research Foundation at programs@traumaresearchfoundation.org. Thank you again so much for being here, and I